네, 이제 첫째 날 마지막 프로그램만 남겨놨는데요. 바로 그 에피센터 패널입니다. 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 아주 인기가 많은 큰 팟캐스트 중에 하나인 에피센터인데요. 그래서 특히 더 기대가 되고 있습니다. 1시간 동안 업계 유명한 인사들과 함께 기술적인 이야기들을 나누는 팟캐스트니까 여러분들도 한번 시간이 되시면은 들어보시면 아주 좋을 것 같습니다. 오늘 패널들은 세 분을 모실 건데요. The founder of Cryptium Labs, Adrian Brink, Director of Strategy and Business Development of SKALE Labs, Liang, 그리고 방금 발표를 해주신 Co-founder of IRISnet, Harriet 가 패널로 나오시겠습니다. 그리고 오늘의 진행은 Co-founder and CEO of Course One 그리고 에피센터의 진행자인 Brian, Fabian, Crain이 수고를 해주시겠습니다. 그러면은 저희 패널리스트들과 모더레이터를 한번 큰 박수로 맞으시겠습니다. Please give them a big round of applause.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for coming. So we're going to speak about validation proof of stake today, and and sort of what's going on. We have a bunch of different projects here. So I thought maybe first we can just do a brief round of introduction, and you guys can each introduce yourselves and the project you're working on. Harriet, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so my name is Harriet, and I just delivered a talk around IRISnet. So I'm going to probably do this short and give time out to our other wonderful guest.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. I work for a project called SKALE Labs, and we're basically building a elastic layer 2 sidechain network. So what that really means is we focus a lot on giving developers an experience where they want their own environment to execute their dApps, and they're able to do so using sort of Ethereum code and EVM code. And we are secured by our own decentralized set of validators as well. So we really believe that in addition to scalability, usability is something we care a lot about as well.
Cool. I'm Adrian. I'm one of the founders of Cryptium Labs. Cryptium Labs, in a nutshell, is a bunch of protocol engineers that like to sort of do research in the decentralized application space, build cool blockchains, extend existing blockchains, help maintain them, and we also happen to run validators on the things we find interesting from a technical perspective.
Cool. So proof of stake is not always an easy thing to wrap your head around. There's also lots and lots of different different protocols using staking in some ways that look radically different. So I thought maybe we could start there. So Liang, you guys are currently designing, or pretty far ahead, but you have been designing a proof of stake protocol with staking logic. So maybe can you first define what do you think, what is proof of stake, what is staking, and what is the role of staking as you want it to be in the SKALE network?
Great, yeah. So I think starting at a really high level, proof of stake is just a new way to secure chains. I think when Bitcoin started, everybody got really familiar with the proof of work system. I think proof of stake, where I really, really like it, is asking, is there a deeper economic incentive, and tying that more core to the protocol. So when we think about really designing a staking model, we always start with, at least at SKALE, we start with the technology. How does the consensus work? So we run a sort of leaderless asynchronous consensus. And really what that means is that as a validator, you join the network and you spin up 1 node, 2 nodes, or a number of nodes. And as nodes, you sort of do work for different sidechains on the network. The question and the problem I think proof of stake is fundamentally trying to solve is, how do you actually prevent bad actors from behaving as such? And if there are bad actors in the network, how do you kind of penalize them and prevent that? So when we really think about staking, I see it really, with any validator, there's 2 things to think about. One is just technically, can they perform? So this is a lot of the stuff that you guys at Cryptium are looking into, and hardware solutions and all that. But then on the economic side, how do you actually design a system where people have economic stake? And this goes back to this idea of just incentives, and humans are motivated by incentives, right? So if you put in something that you could actually lose for bad behavior, or if you do the intended behavior, you could actually get rewarded for it. That's ultimately what staking is trying to achieve in a way that doesn't have the problems that proof of work has, such as the electricity costs and sort of the hardware overhead as well.
So if you look at chains like Cosmos or Iris or Tezos, then you have the validators generally have like some sort of relationship with the chain and the developers and the community. In SKALE, since you're doing this shuffling of validators across chain, what does that change?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think to really frame it, first, like one thing about the proof of stake like networks is that I think Cosmos and Tezos were some of the earlier implementations, and there's this delegated proof of stake model. In SKALE, the way we think about it is validators are quite modular, and that really stems from this idea of like dApps want their own environment to execute, right? And this is very akin to what you see in traditional startups and Web 2, right? You don't go to AWS today, spin up a server and share it with someone else. So that's really the experience we're trying to create. So then it has to start there, which is sort of our vision. And then where the shuffling really comes in is this idea that, we're trying to abstract away some of the things you see in delegated proof of stake, because we run a more like leaderless model. So we want any validator who spins up a node to be able to perform and do work for any sidechain. Now, that obviously has some trade-offs, which, to answer your question, I think if you're a dApp and you don't want to, build and figure out what your validator set is, you just want to be able to drop your smart contract into a more scalable environment in a cost-effective way, then SKALE's model really works, right? Now, on the flip side, and this is why it's less of pros and cons, but more of a trade-off, if you're building some massive chain and there's a lot of value on it today, you probably want to recruit your validator set because, we probably know in the world there's probably really 40 like professional validator shops. So that's inherently the trade-off you're making. So that's really kind of what's happening today. The one thing I will add is in the future, it'll be interesting when there are, we were talking about this just now, when there are millions of users and different use cases, if you have a chain where there is one validator set, does that, and then they need a way to prioritize, who to serve and all that, does that inherently sort of preclude some use cases or dApps who are starting off from using it and then enable only the bigger ones? So these are some of the questions that I think today the end user base is still growing and it's exciting, but I don't think we're there to actually have these deeper, mature chain trade-offs.
Sure, cool. So proof of stake is also, like many or most proof of stake networks have like some notion of on-chain governance. And staking is often quite coupled to it. So Adrian, Cryptium, you guys have been very active on Tezos, but also on Cosmos. Like, what are your main learnings in terms of the governance model and the difference between the two networks in terms of governance?
Yeah. So just as a little bit of background, in both Cosmos and Tezos, we've been very active in the governance process. So in Cosmos, we proposed Proposal 7 and sort of injected this into the governance process. And in Tezos, we will be proposing actually something this week. But fundamentally speaking, the systems are very different. So Cosmos is sort of on the spectrum, sort of over here on the signaling side, and Tezos is sort of over here on the enforced on-chain governance upgrades, where code becomes law and people vote on fixed code, and if they sort of accept that code, then we'll automatically upgrade all nodes across the network. Currently, this is also something that Polkadot is proposing. Polkadot will use WASM. Tezos uses a stripped-down version of the camel compiler. If you're into languages, it's very interesting how this is done, but sort of the compiler sandboxes it. But sort of seeing and interacting with those two governance systems, it's, I think to myself, what we're seeing is that you ideally want both. So you want some form of enforceability where the community knows exactly what they're voting on. The token holders know exactly what they're voting on, and sort of there's no ambiguity as to what their decision is, right? Like if you want to change, let's say how the underlying proof of stake implementation works, you want to be very certain what specific changes you're voting on. But on the other side, what Cosmos with the signaling approach allows to, like it allows for much more open participation. So in Tezos is restricted to people that have deep technical understanding in OCaml and sort of protocol engineering. And in Cosmos, it's like anyone can write up a HackMD file, it's a markdown, and sort of like go, cool, world, what do you think? Governance, what do you think? Let's get sort of this idea on how the community stands on this proposed solution or this proposed problem. I think fundamentally in both governance, you want both, right? So you want to have something that does this binding on-chain thing and then the signaling, because if you only have one of those, you disenfranchise some part of the community. Yeah, so I think that's the main differences here. And I think in an ideal world, both chains would adopt each other's models, because I think they're very complementary to each other. They're by no means exclusive, and we should sort of innovate a lot more on the actual governance processes on these live systems, because I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruits and easy room for improvements there.
Cool. That's a great point. No, I totally agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. And we have sort of seen that in Cosmos even, right? Where we had like the text proposal first, right, where it described the thing, and then another proposal with a code hash goes a little bit in that direction. But yeah,
it's I think you want to even take it further than not that. So with binding on-chain governance, you have a very high cohesion factor, because sort of in a pure signaling system, even if you signal over a specific code hash to run, you end up in this problem. What happens if the validator set never upgrades? What happens if the validator set fundamentally opposes this? And sort of the binding on-chain governance, where code becomes law automatically, you sort of circumvent this problem that if the token holder set wants it, they're getting it. And like the only way to prevent this is by hard forking state and like removing a bunch of token holders that really want this change.
cool.
In Cosmos, actually, we can move into this direction because nowadays you can compile Go into WebAssembly, and I think hopefully sort of the industry will move towards WebAssembly. So also in Tezos, so you can also compile OCaml to WebAssembly, and so ideally we can build this as future upgrades to the networks.
Cool. No, that sounds like a great idea. So Harriet, you guys launched IRISnet actually before the Cosmos Hub even. What has your experience been so far with the network? What has gone well? What has gone poorly?
Right. Actually, I also want to add a point to the governance actually Adrian just shared. So Adrian has been explaining like the difference of Cosmos and also Tezos. But I want to add a point. Iris Hub is a part of the Cosmos ecosystem, and we are kind of trying to combine the benefit from both sides. So on IRISnet, for the governance part, we are supporting quite complicated and comprehensive governance proposals. So of course, like the text proposal, which is quite flexible, but the other things is very structured and is really enable like the code is law. For example, like if like the community with the token holders, they vote to have the certain parameters get updated, and as long as like if the proposal get passed, then that will be enabled. And we just complete a very interesting parameter change like proposal, I think 3 weeks ago. And I think it's a very interesting process because as a core development team ourselves, we proposed to add more challenges for the validators. So basically, to put the slashing condition more strict. So we did a lot of communication, and then we were quite encouraged by the validators. They're very supportive. For basically, if like the uptime, the uptime, it is. Yeah, it is like it is lower than the certain threshold, then they are going to get slashed. And the lessons we learned from that governance proposal is we actually put the threshold very high. We require like 83% of the voting power. They have to participate in the voting. But then in reality is, my feeling is like most community members, if they see like they really agree on this proposal, then they might not just vote. But people will vote if they have very strong objections. So that's why, like, in the end, like for this proposal, only 4 hours left, and we are 80% voting power participated, and so everyone is a little bit like nervous because people really want this proposal get passed, but they're worried like maybe just because there are not enough voting powers, then it might not get passed. So, so next time, I think for the other proposals, we might like to set up more realistic and practical, like the threshold for the participation. And so all these things, by the way, and also like even for the stashing conditions, we got really good feedbacks through engaging the community. And actually, I want to thank for Adrian, just 1 day before we launched the mainnet. And so him and also other, a couple of other validators, they're sending us feedbacks. They say like, maybe the slashing condition should be a little bit easier for the validators to begin with, because many people, they still need to get familiar with network. So that's why I feel like for the governance part, it will combine like really on-chain and also like even off-chain, like we're really real human, and then that part of communication and community building, I feel is also very important.
Interesting enough on this point, I feel very strongly that, well, yeah, I know I do feel strongly about this, that we, like, by and large, we should increase slashing parameters for double signing massively. So on most networks, they're way too low. Like we can easily slash 20% or something for someone that double signs. On the other hand, sort of the, like being offline for a day or two, in my opinion, this isn't, because it's not a huge risk to the networks themselves, right? If you're running BFT consensus and like one guy is offline, he doesn't represent a systemic risk to the network. So I think we should, as a sort of validator, should optimize never for uptime and mostly for safety. Because like safety is actually really dangerous to networks, whereas liveness is sort of only dangerous in large scales.
No, but the same thing with double signing. I mean, if some 1% validator double signs, it doesn't really matter.
Oh, I agree. Like in the long run, we will, or maybe not in the long run, ideally in the short run, we want correlated slashing. So like if many people, if many validators, large amount of stake commits a fault at the same time, we want to slash them proportionally larger. Yeah.
Sure. So another topic that I also kind of discussed it in the talk before is the sort of the entry of exchanges who start staking tokens, and this could potentially have some pretty significant effects on proof of stake. So I don't know, maybe Liang, what are your thoughts on that happening, and is that something that you guys take into account when designing the protocol?
Yeah, it's an interesting part because when I read about the whole like Poloniex exchange staking, I sort of went with, is this good or bad? But then I kind of realized it's probably going to happen anyways, regardless if people think it's good or bad. And where I really kind of go off is that if you look at just like token distribution and the different stakeholders, it does serve like maybe the retail token holders or the people who want to deploy the capital, but quite frankly aren't as technical as either of you guys on this panel to like really deploy any of that. I think just some high level thoughts. I think it's going to be one of the things that will be really good from it is I think just playing around and testing pricing. If I remember correctly, Poloniex is doing like 25% or something. But implicit in that, there's more than just staking. Right, the returns are lower, but then there's downside protection, right? And I think, even if you talk to a lot of delegators, they're looking for some of these products. So I'm not saying exchange staking is the right way to do it, but it is interesting they're kind of adding that feature, and not saying the Poloniex way of doing it is correct, but it is something worth exploring. I think as it comes to designing the protocol and for SKALE, I think it's one of those things where, again, regardless if we agree or disagree with it, it will probably be one of those other key players in the validator set. And so you kind of have to account for it. And to me, where my mind goes is just these decentralization of the network and really how that looks in a world with exchange staking. But that's slightly different in a delegated proof of stake model and more of like a proof of stake model on a node by node basis like we have as well.
So you say decentralization of staking. What do you, like, what's What's your conception of that? Like, what would you like that to look like in an ideal scenario for the network?
Yeah, so I think decentralization, obviously really big topic. For me, in a world with exchange staking, I think they're a key player, but if you look at if one exchange figures out the model and then maybe other exchanges follow through, there's also like maybe multiple exchanges doing exchange staking, so that might distribute the stake a little bit. But to your question about decentralization, I think one of the things you absolutely have to have is just a distribution of weight in any network, right? And this goes back to a simple concept where, if any one validator or a set of validators control too much of the network, effectively you have maybe not a central actor, but like an oligopoly, and that also hasn't proven to be great as well to securities network in a more like permissionless way.
On sort of this exchanges offering staking services, I think it's a natural progression that is bound to happen anyway, because otherwise exchanges will sort of are threatened to see a large outflow of capital if they don't offer any sort of staking solutions, right? But I think it's not really a problem. So sort of the token holder set between people that choose to stake with sort of let's call them indie validators, the non-exchange validators, and the people that choose to stake with an exchange is like a very disjoint set, because sort of the people that want to control their own money, the people that sort of are in it for the ideological reasons, they won't transfer the money to an exchange because that exchange offers staking. But the people that sort of just the retail investors that want to actively trade or that just want to hold small amounts and don't want to have to worry about security there, I don't think they will transfer from an exchange to an indie validator either way. So I think sort of whether exchanges will become very large validators within your network is mostly a function of your token holder set, not of what the exchange or the individual validators do. This is mostly predetermined by sort of who holds your token. One important point though is that we need programmable staking, and I can't stress this enough. So programmable staking is the idea that, for example, an exchange like Poloniex can liquidly trade staked atoms in this case. So Poloniex is offering the active trading of atoms that are staked against their validator, which is cool because people, like their product now is that people get to stake with Poloniex or like put the money on Poloniex, but because they have liquidity in their asset. And this is something that individual validators cannot offer right now. So I think as networks, we need to move towards this programmable staking model where any validator can effectively issue the same kind of derivative, where sort of if you stake with, let's say, Chorus 1 or Cryptium Labs, you still get the derivative that you can have a liquid market for. Because otherwise, if your network doesn't have this, exchanges will have a massively advantageous position in the kind of products they can offer for staking. And I think in the long run, this may actually tilt the balance towards exchanges, that even some of the people large holders that sort of want to have their own money, at some point it's a real trade-off to them, like, do I want to control my own money or do I want to have immediate access to liquidity? And I think sort of in the long run, this may shift towards the liquidity side. But this is easy compatible, like building programmable staking into most systems is like relatively straightforward.
Actually, I want to add 2 points.
Sure.
Yeah, since like IRISnet has already been running for 4 months, and we have like the big exchanges that are running their mining pool again as a validator on IRISnet. So I would add 1 point. Actually, I see like this has 2 sides. And one thing is really help to lower the bar to enter for a lot of normal token holders, because we realize actually many of the token holders, they are not so familiar with like how to work with the private key. And then when they exchange, they are offered the staking service. Then they can just stake from like the centralized like in a so like it's really like be managed by the exchange. It's lower the bar for more people be able to participate in the staking. So I think that is a good part. But of course, it also had the side effects to decentralization. And on that part, and what we have been doing is I think the core team and also the foundation behind of the team need to do a lot of communications. And we have been talking with our private sale participants. They're running like big validators on the network, and to help, and of course also the exchange node, the validator, to help them to understand the importance of decentralization, and also how the decentralization is to support the health of the network. And actually we are seeing the things happening, like those big nodes, they are redistribute their voting powers to other validators. So, and also other thing is, for the foundation, like we are also reserved about like 10 to 15% of IRIS tokens, just to support the smaller validators, and if they prove the value to the network, to by this way to also to enable a more decentralized community growth.
Cool. Thanks.
Just one more point on the decentralization part that is interesting too is it's sort of changing what like a good validator looks like, right? In the early days, people weren't sure if like everyone had the same technical capability, but I think there's also this commoditization of like what a validator does, and then the part you compete on that you could generate extra commissions and all that, I think is yet to be determined, right? Because I think nowadays, especially with how people share their open source setups, people learn how to set up a good technical setup. But then the question then becomes, well, as a bread and butter validator or a good branded validator, like what is your niche value add? I think that's something that, while maybe exchange staking is sort of bringing that to the forefront, because it is gonna, like for smaller validators, I think gonna be a huge issue, because like what do you actually compete on, right? And I think that's an interesting element to consider in the decentralization.
Right, so because that, I mean, if we, if you look at right now, right, on Cosmos, for example, the biggest 3 validators are all like 0% commission or 4% commission. So in a world where, or maybe the question here, do you guys think this is going to go to like 0% commission for like generally broadly across validators, or what are some expectations here?
I don't think so. So I think right now proof of stake is way too friendly. Like validation is such a friendly industry. It's like everyone talks to each other, everyone like shares security setups. No one tries to actively fuck with each other. I think once that changes, and this may not change sort of innately to a single chain, but this will change once other chains start attacking other chains. That sort of validation becomes a lot more hostile. I think running zero-fee validators will not be feasible in the long run, mostly because at 0 fees, you're not going to deliver sort of the same security setup, the same attention to detail as someone that actually charges a reasonable fee. So actually, I think in the long run, we may end up seeing fees sort of tick up depending on sort of how many slashing events there are, right? Like if a new validator gets slashed every month, all of a sudden people very much care a lot less about the commission that they're charging and much more about did that validator get slashed in the last year or not. The other thing why I think zero-fee validators are unlikely is the other sort of outside of the security realm, the other large function that validators will take in these networks is technical due diligence, which I think why it's like relatively unfeasible to run hundreds of networks as a competent validator. And I think a large sort of value add for most validators will be that they have a deep technical understanding on how these protocols work, what governance, and I don't even mean this in terms of writing upgrades. I mean this in understanding what governance proposals mean to the future of the network and sort of making informed choices on behalf of your delegators, so that if you delegate to me, you don't delegate to me because I have the lowest commission rate or because I have the most secure setup. You delegate to me because I sort of act as you would listen to me on Twitter or in like a blog post about what to do next or like how to vote on the governance proposal, because you sort of delegate your governance voice to me because you assume that I have a better technical understanding of how this network will evolve over time than I, as sort of an average token holder that spends like an hour a week on this.
Right, but I guess the issue with this argument is though that I mean, maybe Cryptium does that work, or maybe we do like lots of work on like future of Cosmos and stuff, but it's something that everybody benefits from, but you don't necessarily have to pay for, right? Because you can then delegate to somebody else, and so I think that argument, not sure that's going to play out like that.
I sort of see the argument there that you're making, right? Cryptium Labs will do the analysis anyway. So I don't have to delegate to Cryptium Labs. I can just like delegate to someone zero commission, read the analysis, and then change my vote depending on that. That's true, but so right in terms of the economic incentive, there is the economic incentive you want to have from short-term fluctuations in the market price and from long-term investing. And sort of if you're betting on the short-term appreciation, absolutely you will abuse this and delegate to the zero commission guy and sort of keep exiting out of your position. But if you're investing in a network and you expect to hold the token 5 years, 6 years, I would hope, and I think that most investors in that sense are smart enough to know that if they all flock to the 0% validators, no one will actually be paid to take care of the network. And so what does that do to the long-term value of the underlying asset that you're validating here and that you're actually committed to holding? So I have the hope. I can't sort of, in the short-term rational actor model, sure, people will go to the 0% validators. But I think for people that are expecting to hold longer term, they may have slightly more complex incentives there.
Yeah, and another like complicating factor I think in the future that's yet to be known is also just like demand side usage, right? Maybe all valid, like there could be a scenario where people charge really low commission fees, but if on the demand side people are willing to pay the transaction fees and the underlying token is worth a lot, like that could work as well too. But I think that's also, like to me, I think it always goes back to like at the end, are people actually using underlying blockchains, and is that market big enough to then support the whole ecosystem, of which staking is one? But you know, it goes back to like fundamentally a lot of these networks are meant to be permissionless, where the supply side is compensated largely from the demand side, and I think that hasn't really come online yet.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think in many of these networks, let's say Cosmos and I think Tezos too, right? The commission applies to both block rewards as well as transaction fees. So I mean, that doesn't really matter, I think, in this regard.
Yeah, I guess what I'm just saying is that like until there's a system where you know people actually want to build these like killer dApps on blockchains and there's a big enough user base, like playing the economics just on the supply side, I think, and toggling it. Yeah, maybe there's 0% fee, maybe there's 1%, but maybe you could even all charge 20%. And I'm not sure if like the model sustainably, like as you guys are growing your teams and all that, could actually work if the underlying usage isn't there, is I guess where I was going.
Okay. Harriet, what are your thoughts on commission rates and sort of stake distribution?
Yeah, I think Liang and Adrian has been sharing a lot of deep insights, validating on the different network. As the development team, what we see on the IRISnet is, so validators is in this role, they are kind of like a service provider. And then the delegators, they are consuming the service. And it's really like, people have a different level of expectations. Some of the service consumers, maybe they are more cost sensitive. So when they are not understanding the impact of slashing, they will pick up like the very low commission rate validators. But very soon, like they get educated. And also some of the other service consumers, the delegators, for example, like we do see some of the institute, and the question they are asking us is how to understand the reliability and accountability of the validators. And for them, they would rather actually to find a very professional validators. They are very active in the community, and so they would rather to pay a little bit higher commission, but to get a peace of mind. So in my opinion, it is a very diverse community. So I don't really worry too much if some like validators, they are charging just 0%, and some validators, they are charging higher for their service, because the community, they are also quite diverse. They will, I think I quite welcome the diversity of the validators service.
Cool. Maybe sort of a final question. Any wild predictions or expectations about how the kind of proof of stake world will evolve in the next, 3 to 4 years? If you take a little bit of a longer time horizon.
I think it would be fascinating. So let's start with that. It would be cool, for sure. I think sort of we have this promise of smart contracts and that people can sort of like write legal contracts and smart contracts. I think what I expect to see is that the individual validator service offerings will be much more diversified. So right now, on Tezos, for example, it's like a single private key that controls your validator. So sort of the product that you can offer is fairly uniform, right? Like all the 400 bakers can sort of do the same thing. In Cosmos, this gets slightly better because you can have a multi-sig key, although I think very few people are using those actually. But once you can have smart contracts that fully control what a validator does, you can start building fascinating kind of products where it's a, let's say I charge a 20% commission rate. But in code, I commit that half of this gets paid into the DAO, into a DAO. I can build a system in which we can sort of have a delegation marketplace where I offer as a service that I pick sort of a portfolio of different validators, right? That I sort of write a smart contract that can subset my the collected delegation to a bunch of validators based on different metrics. We can start seeing that we can split up the security aspect of it, so the validation side and consensus from the governance side. So we may end up electing sort of some like small parliament for our chains, right? Where it's like the parliament sort of gives technical opinions on where this chain should go, and the DevOps people go into securing the chain. I think really we want to enable more degrees of freedom for validators to like build their service offerings in as trustless a fashion as possible. Another cool thing is, once we have sort of staking derivatives, we can start building decentralized insurance funds where like I know these 5 validators and they're cool guys, and we sort of assume that we build a common insurance between us 5 because we sort of audited each other's setup, and now the staking derivatives that you receive is fungible between all 5 of us, and we sort of we commonly share the risk of each one of us going down. And so, yeah, I think there will be fascinating things happening in proof of stake. I think though that at least for now, if you're validator, it simply does I'm running a bunch of AWS servers, maybe with an HSM on AWS Cloud. It is very unlikely that you're going to make tons of money. Like this is not going to be a super high return business model if the only thing you're doing is running a bunch of servers and like maintaining a private key. Because like you're adding so little value. I think validators really have to start figuring out how to add value beyond simply signing blocks every once in a while.
Yeah, I really like the sort of like the DeFi aspect to it. I think if you look at traditional markets, right, it starts off simple staking, you stake and you get some return, and there are these parameters, but let's say you need liquidity, right? So I think that's a problem for some people. And then some other people want yield over liquidity. I think you'll start, matchmaking there. So I think the DeFi aspect of it will really grow, and I think you guys talk about it with the vouchers and all that. So that's pretty exciting. I think the other thing I would really like to see is just like a better way to kind of have like some baseline evaluation of what a good validator is. And obviously people in this room, if you follow it, you kind of know, and you can read docs and all that. But like for a non-sophisticated user, someone who's just getting in, like what is the tool they could use to be like, here's how I should even think about validation without having to go too deep in the weeds, but deep enough that I don't just hit a button on an exchange or something. I think this evaluation and some of these like wraparound services I expect to kind of see as the entire validator industry sort of professionalizes even further than it does today.
Yeah, I think like it's going to be very, very exciting, and also it's not going to be very far away. Like especially like when we are expecting IBC inter-blockchain communication protocol is going to really take out within this year. So I think like interoperability enabled by IBC is going to really change our blockchain world profoundly, and it's going to make the POS, the staking, like more secure and also more interesting. Actually, we have been discussing many interesting ideas because we are talking about multi-hub collaboration. So using like the IBC, later on what you can expect is when two blockchain make the connection through IBC, they can even like provide staking service to each other. And so like the validators, they can transfer their tokens through IBC to the other side and serve as the collateral. And so for this collateral, like serve as two purposes. One is as the security deposit. So if the other side is doing like some wrongdoings, then it's subject to slashing. But like that, that delegation can also like work as a special delegation arrangement, so it can also earning the rewards for the validators. They are it's kind of like they actually can validate on multiple networks. So I'm quite looking forward for all this new innovation and exciting things happening.
Cool, thanks so much. Maybe we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Cool, I think we're the first panel to get a question.
So my question is directed at Adrian. I love the word programmable staking. And could you expand on the concept of programmable staking? I'm especially curious about whether programmable staking is only possible in smart contract chains. And could you have programmable staking in non-smart contract chains like the Cosmos Hub?
So programmable staking as sort of the fundamental concept is mostly about that currently in both Cosmos and Tezos, validators have a single consensus key that is used for signing blocks. But this key also fulfills some other functions, and Cosmos has sort of split this up. There's a different key that's used for sending funds, and Tezos has the same key. And programmable staking is really all about this notion that you have a smart contract that returns the key that is used to sign blocks. It returns a consensus key, sort of a constant time access to the smart contract. And then everything else, how you vote in governance, whether you give out derivatives, whether your delegators can override your vote or not, how you spend the money from that key, that can all live within a smart contract that is completely arbitrary and sort of only has to fit within the gas limit as defined by the protocol. Whether you can build this into Cosmos, generally speaking, yes. You may want to add a small scripting language to allow this. You may want to add a small VM that is only allowed to sort of do that. But generally speaking, there's like, you don't have to give smart contracts to the general public if that's not something the community desires, but you can give sort of limited smart contracts to the validators in order to refine their product offering. Cool. Thank you for the question.
Okay. Anyone else?
We have 2 questions.
What proof of stake projects are you excited about other than your own projects?
Cryptium Labs doesn't have its own project, right? We're sort of like very network agnostic here. Some of them that I'm excited about, Tezos, Cosmos, Iris. I think Straight Edge and Edgeware will be interesting. Kusama may also be sort of an interesting experience. We'll see where that goes. That looks a lot like chaos, like design chaos. Polkadot most certainly once it goes live as well. There are some others, but it's sort of, they have to bring deep technical innovation. And it's yet to be seen on some of them whether sort of the marketing speech actually translates into usable products that sort of fulfill some of those promises. Yeah, that's from my side.
Yeah, I think obviously SKALE, but I think Adrian mentioned I think some of the things like Polkadot, the research they're putting out is interesting. I care a lot about just like mechanisms, right? This whole like nominated proof of stake is interesting. It's not implemented yet, but I think as more people find different systems, I think other networks who are maybe further along or live could actually leverage some of that and drop that in. So I think the mechanisms and the spin each project has on it, these mechanisms are quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like blockchain is still in its quite early stages. There are many new innovations need to happen. So while we are very excited with the work we are currently working in like Cosmos ecosystem around like Cosmos Hub and Iris Hub, and we are also like quite open to learn and observe what are the other projects innovations. So for example, like Algorand and Polkadot.
Yeah, I mean, on course one side, I guess there's some Cosmos projects that we're working with. So in particular, Kava and Region Network, and then there are also a bunch of other blockchains that we're like on test now working with, like Solana, SKALE, we plan to run, and then you know, Polkadot, and there's some other cool projects coming up.
I can second Region as well, and Kava and Solana. Good point. They're
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Well, cool. Then with that I think we are over time. So thanks so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and thanks so much for the questions as well, and joining this conversation.
Yeah.